another struggling offense, and I want to kind of dive into this because I just wrote about it for Sharp Football Analysis on Wednesday. Let's talk about Cowboys Rams, because the Rams are in an interesting spot here because they are bad. They're a tough watch on offense. Right now they are 31st in yards per play on offense, which is insane right now. 2 games under 4 yards per play, and one of them was week 1. The most recent was week 4 against San Francisco. And again, I said this in the article, like against the 2 of the best defenses in the league, but like the Rams aren't supposed to be an offense that hinges on the defensive quality of the opponent, right? Like they are supposed to be able to, do what they do against whoever. So everything on the Rams right now is just a little bit worse than it was last year. And that's had like big ramifications everywhere, right?
No
They've
pun
lost
intended.
they've lost like a couple of pieces. Oh yeah, there was no the pun intended. Like it's too early in the morning for that to have been intended. But like so. The offensive line is obviously like the biggest one, right? You lose Andrew Whitworth. There's been injuries across that offensive line going throughout the season, right? They're going to be on their 3rd center coming into this week. It's just been, hit or miss. They've already had more offensive line combinations like this year than they had all of last year. Their most common offensive line has only played 40% of the snaps this year. That was over 60% last year. It's been tough. So I think one of the biggest things there is they don't trust the offensive line enough to run empty. And again, we talked about that so much. The Rams had one of the best empty packages in the league last year because they trusted the offensive line. They had Matthew Stafford, and that was a vertical empty game that worked out well. And they don't trust that offensive line to hold up in a 5-man protection. So they're empty so much less. Right. So they have gone from almost 30% of Stafford's dropbacks last year were an empty. It's only 18% this year. And that's still like a top 10 rate, but that's such a big drop from what they did last year. Like that was such a big piece of what they did and being able to stretch the defense horizontally, but also hit those vertical shots. That was such a big piece of what the Rams did. And they can't do it right now. And you look at like everything is just, it feels like so condensed. And it's like, it's one of those things. It's kind of like the Ravens and Mark Andrews, right? If you have Cooper Kupp, who's still putting up great numbers, and actually, like if you look at it, like almost better numbers, like on a rate basis than he had last year. Like he's getting targeted more like per route. He's a bigger piece of the offense technically, but like there's nothing else.
Yeah, and even Cooper Kupp, when you look at him, like even he's almost 4 yards fewer per catch than he was last year. He's almost 3 yards fewer than per target than he was last year too. So even they're just throwing to him a lot more and shorter, like you said, everything's condensed. So it's one of these stories like, oh, Cooper Kupp's he's pacing to shatter the reception record, but they're not really great receptions and in terms of real football.
Right, and there's not a lot of room to run either, right? His long is 28 yards.
He's not even averaging 10 yards a catch.
Yeah.
Right now, that's not good. Like when you're leading receiver, a guy that you're giving the most targets to isn't even leading, like it doesn't even have 10 yards per catch. Like that's not good. That tells it all. And like you said, it's a cumulative issue. Offensive line, surrounding playmaker, Stafford's elbow, whatever you want to do. It's rough, man. They have 9 passing plays of 20 or more yards. It's the 3rd fewest in the NFL. It's bad. And the other thing is, too, they have no outs. Like we talked about the Chargers a little bit. This team cannot run the football either. And they couldn't run it last year at all. They were 31st, I think, in EPA running the ball last year. You lose the offensive lineman. They can't run the football at all. So they have no way to make it easy. They have no way to generate anything easy right now on offense. And you're going to be facing a team that can rush the passer. Like the Cowboys haven't faced a lot of good teams, but like, they can rush the passer. We know that. They rushed the passer all last year. Even like when you say, all right, they're not going to get all their turnovers, right? We know they can rush the passer. They can rush the passer again this year. It's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for them this week. And, maybe Cooper Rush is doing his game management thing again, and the Cowboys hang around and can steal one. But the Rams have like real big picture problems.
Yeah. So one of the things, like we talked so much about how defenses are approaching just offenses across the league, right? And playing too high, you're going to stop them from, throwing anything deep. That's not happening with the Rams. Well, no, it's not even that. Teams are playing a cover 3 because they're using that second safety right now to sit in the intermediate level, because that's where the Rams killed last year. They had such a good intermediate game, and they want to cut off those crossers. And that's what the crossers and the digs, which is where, Cooper Kupp killed last year. That's where like the Odell Beckham did last year. Like even, Van Jefferson a little bit was a really good intermediate threat for them when things were clicking. But teams don't want the Rams throwing there, and it started with the Bills. Right now, Matthew Stafford, so 19.5% of his passes last year went to between 11 and 19 air yards. It was one of the highest rates in the league. This year, it's 8.7%. That is easily the lowest rate in the league. There's no other quarterback right now below 12%. So the place where they killed so much, and like that's kind of what you think of when you think of that Rams offense. It was all those crossers, and that gives Cooper Kupp the space. The defenses right now are flooding that area. The Rams have the most cover 3 played against them for like 40% of snaps, and that's been like pretty consistent through all 4 games. Like all 4 teams they face have played cover 3 about 40% of snaps. So they're using that second safety to kind of, the second safety is sitting in the intermediate level. You got linebackers, and the best teams that did that were, obviously the Bills and the 49ers. They have Matt Milano, you have Fred Warner, you have a linebacker who can sit in that area and take away those places. The Cowboys are now on their own playing cover 3 at the highest rate in the league. So like they are going to be trying to take away those intermediate routes. And the Rams just so it's either short passes or it's deep throws. And right now, like Cooper Kupp is taking away, I wrote about this in the article too, like because there's no one else who like kind of has the juice to be the deep threat. Like Cooper Kupp is taking over that role too. Like he has more deep targets down the sideline than he did last year. And like you just can't win that way. So there's so many little things in this Rams offense that aren't working, that are just like exploding to many big problems. Like it's one giant problem because they have so many little ones that they just don't have a lot of ways to figure it out. And then you kind of talk about the run game. Like they're running okay under center. But they've also completely transformed the play action game to make that work. So right now, 95% of Stafford's play action passes have been under center. And they just don't have any like shot plays. 46% of his passes out of play action have been at or behind the line of scrimmage. So like there's nothing generating explosive plays. And like, that's all the Rams were last year. And you go against this Dallas defense that is going to be able to stop that. They have speed, they're going to be able to sit in that intermediate level. And it's a tough look right now.
Yeah, it's rough. On the other side, though, I mean, listen, we keep falling for it, and maybe he won't pull the rug on us, but man, Kellen Moore's been good again.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I think they simplified it to a little bit. So one of the things, like the CeeDee Lamb, I think is a big picture, kind of a part of this, right? We were kind of like wondering, what is CeeDee Lamb doing, especially like early in the season against Washington? Like they had the best usage of CeeDee Lamb. I think I wrote about this in 1st and 10 too. They had motioning him to get him like in the slot to work like on linebackers, and that is something like we hadn't really seen. It was a lot of like early in the season, they were trying to, CeeDee Lamb's good so he can win one-on-one, but like, yeah, that can be true, but also like get him in a favorable matchup. So they motioned him into the slot against Washington. They got him on a crosser that, linebackers were kind of chasing him. The one touchdown he had, they motioned him to where against his zone defense, Cole Holcomb was trying to chase him in the end zone. So they're figuring out that they're setting up some of those easy buttons, and Cooper Rush will be able to take advantage of that. So when you're getting him in advantageous looks, I think that's starting to open up the offense a little bit. And as they're still, figuring some things out, 2 weeks ago, I think they really figured out the pony personnel package. They had some good plays, taking some shots downfield. the one wheel route they had to CeeDee Lamb was set up because of that pony package with Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott on the field. They like barely used that at all last week. So I think they're still figuring that out a little bit, but I think they're incrementally like figuring out how to structurally make this offense better. I think that's going to be a real good sign once Prescott comes back too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been 2 weeks in a row. I've been really impressed with the Cowboys, and I know that they haven't played like the greatest opponents, but this is what we saw in front of last year with Kellen Moore, and then the offense kind of got bogged down again as the season went on. You get a lot more Ezekiel. It feels like they're not going that route this season. It's early, like I said, we've been here before, but everything has looked to make just things easy. And hopefully it wasn't just because Cooper Rush was getting put in, but hopefully it was more like, when Gretsch was on the fantasy podcast last week, we had talked about like the Cowboys versus the Panthers, right? And how, you're thinking the Cowboys seem to be thinking about like their players first and not just plays, whereas the Panthers are thinking about, just doing what they do, right? Like they're running their offense. They're getting guys like Shee Smith the ball. And like the Cowboys are like, well, if we're going to win games, like we need guys like Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb to make plays. And they've put them in spots to make plays, right? And not just like lining up and saying, go win. They put their actual best players in spots to make plays. And we've seen Tony Pollard. He didn't do anything last week, but the previous 2 weeks, he had huge plays against the Giants and the Bengals. And then CeeDee Lamb's been awesome the last 3 games. And I credit that to Kellen Moore. And, you see guys like Noah Brown, right? Like flourishing. Noah Brown, even with Michael Gallup coming back, has the longest reception of his career on a shot play where he's schemed open. Feel pretty good if you're Cowboys, because it could have been dark, right? Like I think everyone felt pretty bad. Tyron Smith was already, you come into the year losing him. We were on a podcast talking about like, ooh, the Cowboys, man. And the defense is still playing really good. You've got obviously basically one of the best, defensive players in the NFL in Micah Parsons. DeMarcus Lawrence playing really great to start the year. And if they pull this one out and they're, going to be sitting, right there at the top of the division again, right behind the Eagles, playing the Eagles on Sunday Night Football next week. Yeah. All right. Like now we got something, and Dak might be back.
Yeah. It's one of those things. So this is
I'm dying for the Eagles to play one competitive game so far.
Yeah. So like we talked about this on the podcast when it happened, but like just to go on like a little bit of like a sidebar here. DeMarcus Lawrence getting hurt last year might have been the best thing that could have possibly happened to the Cowboys. Like if they're not down edge rushers, is like Micah Parsons still playing off-ball linebacker like full time?
Maybe.
Right? Like the injuries, like they were forced to play him as an edge last year because they had no other edge rushers. Like if that doesn't happen, is Micah Parsons just playing off-ball linebacker? Like he's maybe like one of the best blitzing linebackers, but we're still like seeing him in coverage way more often. Like they like kind of accidentally fell into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And it's kind of insane how that happened. But like, man, he's so good. Mm-hmm. It's that completely unlocks like having him next to Lawrence, and what they're doing. Like Dan Quinn's doing a real good job there. And I they're one of those teams that's kind of like adjusting to what offenses are doing right now. And they're throwing some different looks. And like, it's a fun defense, and they're playing well without forcing the turnovers that they did last year. Right. We were always concerned about, will they be able to sustain it when they were getting turnovers at like an incredibly high rate that you can't do, for a long stretch of time. But like, I think they're figuring some things out and playing better defense in general, even if the big plays haven't quite been there. I think it's better for their long-term outlook, because they're playing well.